Hey Larry, fall is the best time to plant spring flowering bulbs. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire planting process as well as the care necessary so that next spring you are going to have a beautiful display. Hey buddy. So why is fall such a great time to plant? Well, the air is cool and the ground is warm, and that is the perfect combination for roots to establish and really get settled in, especially with bulbs when nothing else is really going on above ground. The warm soil really makes a difference. Now, hopefully you already have your bulbs, but if you don't, definitely plan ahead because the most popular varieties always go fast, but your independent garden center always stocks a nice supply coming into the season. But if you find that they're out of what you want to plant, certainly check online because there are plenty of choices there. Today I'm planting daffodils, and this is a variety called tete-to-tete. It's a small variety, but I love the small growth above ground and it's not overpowering, and it looks great when you naturalize it into a woodland bed. Now, if you struggle with deer like I do, you're going to be happy to know that most spring flowering bulbs are deer resistant, and the list is quite extensive. Now, unfortunately, tulips, one of the most popular spring flowering bulbs, are not on that list. Deer love tulips. So if you're going to plant them, obviously be sure to put them into a safe part of the property where you have some protection around it, or you could try planting them closer to the house, such as in containers. Bulbs are really flexible too as to the design aspect of it. You could go really formal and put them into a nice grid pattern, but especially in a woodland setting like this, you want it to look more natural. And so if you're doing a lot of bulbs, you could just kind of toss them out onto the ground and plant them where they lay. Or in my case, since I don't have that many, I'm going to kind of randomly place them and plant them that way. And so you'll have a nice bloom of one variety next spring. The other thing you could do is get different types of varieties and different types of species, irises and daffodils and others, and then plant them all at the same time. And the beauty of that is you have even more of a random pattern, a more interesting bloom, and a succession of blooms, so you have a lot more going on over a longer period of time. A few other advantages of planting bulbs is that they don't need a lot of space, and they are excellent candidates for going into a container, and that's always a popular idea with your leftovers or just intentionally planting them all in containers. But you can also plant them into beds like I'm doing today, or you could do them into a lawn. Yes, a spring flowering bulb lawn. I've done it, I did it last year, and I'm so glad I did, and what a display I got the following spring. The other nice thing is that even though it's fall, I'm gonna have plenty of sun here in the springtime. So if you're worried that your yard or your garden is too shady, but you have deciduous trees, well, think about it. The leaves are gonna be falling from the trees right now, just as they are here, and during that time when these are coming up and going into bloom, it's still sunny because the leaves of those trees hasn't fleshed out yet. So you've got lots of options on where you're planting your bulbs in your yard. Now, for pretty much all bulbs, they like well-draining soil, but at the same time, they're very forgiving. So if you're like me here in Georgia, where I have pretty heavy clay soil, but you can see it's got some nice darkness to it, which is a contribution of all the organic material breaking down over time. So that's helping, but it's still dense. But you want good drainage. So you could, if you felt like you really had heavy, very heavy soil, and you wanted to improve that, you could amend the soil, maybe tilling in with some compost or other organic material to lighten it up and to improve the drainage. But because the bulbs are pretty forgiving, you could take your chances, and chances are you'll be okay anyway. And as far as planting, how deep do you plant those bulbs? Well, the general rule of thumb with all bulbs is that you plant them about 3 times the size of the bulb. So this daffodil bulb is roughly 2 inches. So the depth of the hole should be about 6 inches. Now, it's not an exact science. You could go deeper, or sometimes you need to go shallower just because you can't go any deeper. That's probably going to happen here. And that's okay too, because these bulbs will figure it out, and they just have a way of finding the right space underground to put on that bloom in the spring. So I've got some work to do, but I need the right tool for that first. Okay, let's talk about the tools for planting. Now, you probably remember the classic, what's called a bulb planter, and it's basically a cone with a handle on top, tapered more narrowly at the bottom. And the premise is that you hand drive that into the soil and it extracts a core of soil and you pop your bulb into place. Well, I don't have one of those anymore because it's kind of hard, especially in hard soil. So that's gone. So what replaces that? Well, whenever I can, if I'm planting small bulbs, which means I don't have to plant the hole very deep, I'll just use my soil knife. And if I have soil that's cooperating, I can get in there deep enough, and this is working perfectly. So if I had a small bulb, like a dwarf iris, for example, I only need to go in maybe a couple inches, and this knife will do the job. So I highly recommend, if you don't have a soil knife, get one, because you can really simplify the work. And if that's what I was planting today, this would do the job. But since I need to go about 6 inches, I'm not sure this is going to consistently do that. In fact, I know it's not, because I can feel the roots. So then what do? Well, the modern equipment these days is to use a battery-powered drill with a bulb auger. And now you can buy these in the box stores and online. They come in different sizes and diameters, so don't do an overkill, but you need to get enough power. And what I will say is, if you take this option, it can work really well, but it does drain the life out of the battery very fast. So have a few batteries on full charge so that you don't have to stop just because you ran out of juice. So let me just demonstrate here in the same area with this bulb auger. It may or may not work, and that's okay, because you can go up to the next step if you need to, but let's give this a try. All right, so with a little bit of top pressure, that's going to do the job. I'm not quite at 6 inches yet, but I'll get there quickly, in spite of some roots in the way. However, if you have more problematic soil with heavy roots or rocks, or a lot more bulbs to plant, you might want to invest in a larger drill with a bigger auger. They make those and they really do the job. And so consider that. It is an investment, but probably well worth it in saving you time, especially if you have quite a few bulbs to plant. It might be worth it. But in my case, I'm going to stick with the drill here and my soil knife when I can and get this area planted. All right, the holes are done, and that did not take that long, especially with the right equipment. And now the fun part is planting the bulb. So as far as that goes, you're going to take the bulb, and oftentimes, if you're lucky, you'll have a twofer like this right here. But the flat part where the roots are, that is the bottom. So that goes in first, and you put that in firm contact with the soil. So a light press down so you know it's good and in contact with the soil is what you want to do. Pointed side obviously goes up. But before you do that, you have one more optional step, and that is fertilizer. Now, there are a lot of bulb fertilizers out there, and the main active ingredient in a bulb fertilizer is the phosphorus and maybe some nitrogen. So that's what you're looking for. And what it will do is it will help the bulbs establish more quickly and get those roots out and growing faster, especially during the winter time. So it's not a bad idea, but if you do use a fertilizer for this, you want to make sure it's a slow release, organically derived source of nutrients. And so you're usually going to see that in a bulb fertilizer, but for me, I use Milorganite. It's a fertilizer I use a lot around here for many applications, so I always have some on hand, but it has the nitrogen and the phosphorus that I need. This is a 6:4:0 ratio, but you don't need much. So you just put a little bit into each planting hole as you're adding the bulb. That comes in after the fertilizer, but it just takes a little bit. So I have a small handful here. I'll put it into the bottom of the hole, maybe mix it up a little bit, and then in goes the bulb, covering it up, adding some mulch. The other thing about the organically derived source of fertilizer, the reason why that's important and that it's slow release is it's not going to burn the roots of the bulb. If you were to use a synthetic high phosphorus or high nitrogen source of nutrients, it's going to burn that bulb and you may not even get it to produce come springtime. So make sure you do a slow release organic source of nitrogen. All the bulbs are planted. Now, if you needed one more reason to love planting in the fall, I'm about to give it to you, and that is the fall leaves. Mulching, providing some organic matter over the exposed soil surface, is important for a lot of reasons. In the future, as the leaves in this case break down, it's going to add organic matter into the soil and only make it better in the future, so it drains more. That's a great thing, but right now it has some immediate benefit because These are going to help insulate the soil surface, and therefore the soil is going to be a little bit warmer, and so therefore the roots are going to have more of a conducive environment to take off and actively grow even though it's wintertime. It's also going to help hold some moisture in the soil because right now it can be a really dry time of year, as it is for me, and I like knowing that I've got a little bit of extra moisture in there. So there's that as well. But the leaves, I don't have to go anywhere to get them. I don't have to buy them. They're already here, and I just want to make sure I have an even covering over the soil of about 1 inch, and that's looking about right now. The next thing, which is optional for sure, is a layer of protection. Now, if you're worried about foraging critters, even though daffodils are pretty resistant to a lot of critters, this is a great barrier, and this is just hardware cloth. They come in different dimensions. I think this is 1/2 inch squares. You could go 1 inch or even smaller than that, but this is more than adequate right here. And you can cut out a piece that covers the entire area of where you've planted. You can buy it by the roll at a box store or cut it to size as needed with wire cutters, and then just lay it over the top and then anchor it down with rocks or bricks or whatever works for you. But just leave it in place until you start to see new growth emerging, or at least until maybe February, just before the expected time of germination. That's going to be long enough because all you're trying to do at this point is to allow the bulbs enough time to really settle in and establish and the roots to expand, and that's going to anchor them in, and then squirrels or anybody else isn't going to be an issue. So you just need a few months to buy some time if that's a concern, and hardware cloth is an easy to work with solution for that. Okay, almost down to the last step. All right, so a refill on the watering cans. This really is the last step. And I'm watering in for a couple reasons. First of all, it's been very dry here. We haven't had rain in weeks. And the water is going to help kind of tuck the soil in around the bulbs and help them be nice and secure in the ground. But the other thing is the water will wake the bulbs up and let them know it's time to get growing. So there's that. And you know, maybe once or twice a month from here on out until spring, I'll check the ground and make sure that it's moist enough. And if it's not, I'll come back in and do a little more of this. But that's about it. But the nice thing about these bulbs, all the hard work is done now. And from here on out, every year after this, the bulbs will continue to naturalize and multiply so the display only gets better. So plant those bulbs and enjoy the show next spring.